Awesome. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
We'll turn up the volume. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, man, it is so good to be here. Thank you for coming to this event today. I am incredibly excited, and I'll tell you all the reasons why I'm so excited. But there are a few right off the bat I want to hit. First of all, I'm excited I'm actually here because I almost didn't make my flight yesterday. And I live in Montana, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous place, but one of the downsides of Montana is you never know what the weather's going to be like. In fact, Montana holds the record for the single largest temperature change in a single day in the lower 48. When it went from something like 60 degrees to minus 20 in about 2.5 hours. So, there was a snowstorm yesterday. I almost didn't make my flight, but I did. Unfortunately, my sister, Angela, who helped write The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm with me, she was going to be here with me today to help present about the book, but because of the weather, she couldn't actually make it. So she asked me to tell you guys she wished she was here, but she wanted me to tell you not that she was delayed by weather, but that she was delayed by a herd of aggravated alpacas. Her words, not mine. The other reason I'm really excited is I have been doing this residency tour with Barnes & Noble for this entire year. I've been going to a different store each month in a different place to do an event like this. And this, right here and right now, is the last event in this residency tour. Yeah. Which means I get to go home and just edit then for a minute. But yeah, this is my final event, and I'm so happy that it's here because I actually got my start in Texas. My grandmother was a professor and dean of arts and sciences in Houston, and I came down here and toured all around Texas for the self-published edition of Aragon way, way back in the day. So it's really cool to be back here and to be talking about something new. And that's the other reason I'm excited. There's something new. Actually, a couple of new things. First of all, of course, is The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, which came out at the beginning of this year. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that and telling you a few stories about it, and hopefully I'm not going to be boring you too much. If I do start boring you, you let me know and I'll do handstands up here instead. So first of all, there is a new book out, and I was thinking about it the other day, and the last time something in the world of Aragon was published was all the way back in 2011. Which is a long time. That might actually be before some of you were born. That's a terrifying thought. The funny thing is 2011 is actually the same year that a couple other big fantasy authors published their last novels, and that would be Patrick Rothfuss with Wise Man's Fear, and George R.R. Martin. So I think there's something cursed about 2011. And you might wonder why it took me so long to write something new. Well, the answer has a couple of parts. I mean, the first part is I worked on the Inheritance cycle from 1998 until 2011, 2012, when I was still touring for it. And that took me from the age of 15 all the way up to the age of 26, 27. Now, I don't know about you, but going from the age of 15 to 26, 27, working on the same thing, that's a lot of your life. That's a lot of energy. And after I finished that, I needed a break. So I took one. And I wrote a bunch of short stories, some of which may see the light of day someday. I wrote a screenplay that didn't work. And every author has to write a screenplay that doesn't work. Yeah. It's obligatory. Just like every screenwriter has to write a novel that doesn't work. And I have also been working on a massive science fiction novel full of spaceships, lasers, aliens, and explosions, and tentacles. And the cool thing is, we got a title and a release date announced a couple of weeks ago. So the new book, I'm delighted to say, is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. And it's going to be released on September 15th next year, 2020.
I am.
You might wonder why it's getting published so late next year. Why you have to wait that long? And the answer is, it's large enough to kill a small mammal. Okay, I got editing. Boy, have I got editing. It's normal editing. This is not egregious amounts of editing. This is a normal amount of editing for a novel. My editing, from my editors, is 108 pages. Okay? It's 34,000 words of just editing. And that's normal. It's light editing. So that's why it's going to be published in September and not January. It's a nice big book. So if you've enjoyed Aragon, if you've enjoyed the Inheritance Cycle, even if science fiction is not your normal genre that you read, I think you will enjoy this book. And I'm very, very proud of it. Okay, but moving past that, so I'm working on this giant science fiction novel full of spaceships and aliens and tentacles. And the weird thing was, every once in a while, I'd be writing, or I'd be doing the dishes, or I'd be going for a walk, or I'd be falling asleep, and this little voice would pop up in the back of my head, and that voice would say, I wonder what Aragon and Saphira are doing. Or, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you did this with the magic? Or, what if this happened in the world of Alagasia? And, I realized that after spending so long with those characters and so long with that world, I had just, they were part of me. They were burned into my brain and always will be. And I'm sure some of you feel the same way having read the books. And I didn't know what to do with those ideas, though. I kept writing them down. And the problem for me was, up until that point, my experience in writing a story is that to properly write a story, you have to spend 3 to 4 months outlining the plot, and then about 10 years and about 1 million published words in order to write a story. And that's a little scary. But eventually, I decided that I wanted to try writing some of these shorter ideas and see what I could do with them. And the first one I did, and the first one I got an idea for, actually happened, it was about 2 years ago, and I was watching this big blockbuster Hollywood film with my sister, and unfortunately, the movie wasn't very good. And it's probably a movie a decent number of you have seen. I'm not going to tell you what film it is because there's a chance I might have to work with these people someday. It wasn't the Aragon film. I mean, it can't be. They never made one, right? But anyway, so we're watching this movie. I kid. A little. So I'm watching this movie, and it's not very good. And the thing is I don't know about you guys, but personally, me, when I watch things that are flawed, I find them much more inspiring than things that are perfect. A perfect book, a perfect song, a perfect movie, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. You love it, but it's like this polished gem that hangs in front of you, and you admire the beauty, but there's like nothing to grab onto. You can't figure out how to make it, and you can't figure out how to make it better, because it's perfect. But something that's flawed, if you watch a movie where they do something that doesn't work, you know it. Humans are really good at telling stories, and we know when stories don't work. So when you watch something and it doesn't work and your brain says that shouldn't happen, personally, for me, I immediately start thinking about what should happen and how to fix it. And that is very inspiring. So we watched this movie, and it wasn't very good, and I started thinking and talking about it with my sister about how it could be fixed. And as a result, I decided to write the sort of story I had never written before, and that was a story about a dragon. But more specifically, a dragon like you find in old mythology. A huge, angry, hungry dragon. Not a friendly dragon. Which, by the way, as a side note, this is why I am glad that dragons don't actually exist. Because compared with dragons, and I'm not the first one to say this, but compared with dragons, humans are small and soft and crunchy and good with ketchup. So, I sat down and I wrote that story, and it was a real challenge for me to try to write an entire story with a beginning, a middle, and an end in under 1,000 pages. But I think I pulled it off, and that became the Worm, the third story in The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. And then about a year ago, I was up late writing. It was about 1 a.m, and I'd had too much coffee, and I was scrolling through Twitter, and I don't know who did this, but someone tweeted me, and for all I know, it could be one of you, so I'm going to blame this on you guys. But someone tweeted at me and said, "Hey, Christopher, what are Murtagh and Thorn doing these days?" And I couldn't help it. I was feeling snarky. So I wrote back and I said, "Murtagh? He's busy fighting off a bunch of enemies with a magic fork named Mr. Stabby." And the worst thing is, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I started trying to figure out how I could write a serious fantasy story about a magic fork named Mr. Stabby. Whether or not I succeeded, I leave it to you to decide. And then when I was working on that, my sister, Angela, came to me and said that she had an idea for the character of Angela the Herbalist. For those of you who don't know, I based that character off of my sister, Angela. And fortunately for me, she has a really good sense of humor about it, or else I wouldn't be standing here right now. So she went and wrote her chunk of that story, and then I wrote material to tie it all together with Aragon and Saphira. And the thing is when I started writing those first few pages with Aragon, I literally got a tingle down my spine. And about 2 pages in, I stopped writing, and I pushed myself away from my desk, and I said to myself, "Why did I wait so long?" And you know what? I have no intention of ever waiting so long again. As you may have noticed, on the front of that book, it says Volume 1. And yes, there are more collections of short stories coming, and more full-size novels within the world of Alagasia, and To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is publishing next year, so get ready for an overload of Paolini. Also, I'm going to engage in a shameless bit of self-promotion here for a second.
Do it.
I don't know if we have one of these. I'm sure when I say it, someone's going to give me one, and I can show you. But, yes, that's it. Perfect. Thank you. Barnes & Noble has also released this awesome collector's edition of Aragon. And you might wonder what makes this such an awesome collector's edition. Well, it has just shy of 50 extra pages of material, which include all sorts of art, behind-the-scenes stuff, dwarven runes, editing, cool stuff. Oh, yes, and did I mention deleted scenes from Murtagh's point of view? Yes. So if that's your thing, check this out. Oh, and my favorite bit.
Oh, it's like color.
A full color painted map on the front and the back. Also, if any of you are buying this or have this, pull off the dust jacket because the symbol on Brahm's ring is embossed on the cover. Okay, shameless self-promotion over.
Oh, keep going.
I mean, I can do more if you want.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's put that to the side for the moment. All right, so there is obligatory part of every author talk. Can you guys guess what that is? No, we'll get to the questions, but before that, reading. That's right. The problem is, if you've ever, and I say this with all great love to and affection to other authors, but if you go to a lot of author events, you'll know that sometimes readings can be a little boring. And I don't want to bore you guys. So I'm going to do something a little different for my readings. And then we'll do questions, and then I'll sign, and we might get out of here by 10 o'clock. No, I not that late. I'm a fast signer. No, I literally have a conference room named after me at a book distribution center for Random House because of how fast I sign the books. They had me sign, before Inheritance came out, they had me sign 9,400 books in an afternoon and a half. I do not recommend doing this. But I will say they compared my first signature with my last, and they were identical.
That's impressive.
Okay, so readings. What I'm going to do is a very short reading from each of the 4 books in the Inheritance Cycle, and then a slightly longer one from The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So, who has a copy of Aragon I can borrow? Yes, you do. Oh, I don't want to borrow those. That's no fun. All right, let me move the coffee so I don't drop it everywhere. Now, I just have to find the right page here, which I'm sure I can. There we go. Now, I'm going to read you the very first sentence of the very first paragraph of the very first chapter of the Inheritance Cycle. Here goes. Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world.
So deep.
See, we're moving right along. Right. Oh,
Pick me, my
man,
lord.
Eldest. And we got a deluxe edition. I love seeing those. Now, the only problem is the deluxe edition has extra material in the back, so I gotta figure out the right page. 1 second. There we go. Almost there. All right, now we're there. So as I'm sure you know, one of the things I did for this series is I created a number of imaginary languages. Now, I am certainly no linguist like Tolkien. I mean, I was a homeschooled teenager in Montana. What do you expect? But I love language, and I loved playing around with this, and I had a lot of fun with it. Now, the main language I created is the Elvish language, the language of magic, the language of power, the ancient language. And I based it partially off of Old Norse, which I thought gave it a nice sound and feel. So I'm going to read you the Elvish blessing that Aragon receives in the second book. However, I have to apologize because I have an absolutely horrendous Elvish accent. And it's not because I'm not an elf. It's because in the ancient language, you're supposed to roll your R's on the tip of your tongue the way you would in Spanish or Italian. And I can't do that. In fact, the only way I can roll my R's is by wiggling my uvula. That's the thing that hangs in the back of your throat. So I'm going to wiggle my uvula at you guys. And I hope you like it, too. At Trosterni onothelduen, ranulif ringharte onner, undu evrinja onovarda. Now, of course, I did come up with some other languages for the book, and the other big one is the dwarf language. Now, that one I came up with from scratch, and it really is my favorite one. It's just rich and meaty, and you can just sink your teeth into it. So I'm going to read you a chunk of Dwarvish here, and this is an angry dwarf complaining about Aragon and Saphira being in the mountains where the dwarves live. And here's the thing. I actually have an excellent Dwarvish accent. And that's because in the dwarf language, you are supposed to roll your R's by wiggling your uvula. So, let the wiggling commence. Form Hrithkarach, Form Jürgen Karmeter, Dos Edagoroth Bastarnog, Dur Insisti Rakkithen, Gok Iswarv Aj Barzulagor, Dur Durgrenst Aj Schwoden Rak Anwen, Bog Tor Rak Jürgenvran. You know, I wasn't really getting the good R's in there for a second. That's what happens when you fly and you get dehydrated. Hrithkarach. That's better. Okay, whose book was this? Yes, thank you. All right, and Brissinger. Now, Brissinger, third book. As you might have noticed, it's a very large book. And like most large books, it has a lot of words in it. Sentences, too. And, you know, some of them are better than others. There's one that involves a bumble-eating bumblebee that I really should have cut from the book, but I was just a little too fond of it. But out of all the many, many sentences that make up this very large book, there is one in particular that is my absolute favorite. And it's my favorite because, well, I just think it's really well written. I think it has a lot of literary merit. I think that when I wrote this sentence, I leveled up as an author. So do you want to hear my absolutely favorite sentence from Brissinger?
Yes!
All right. Die, puny human! Because what is the point of writing epic fantasy if you can't write lines like "Die, puny human" every once in 1,000 pages? No point whatsoever. All right, we are moving right along. We're going to get into the 4th book, and I am going to read you the very first sentence of the very first paragraph of the very first chapter of the very last book in the inheritance cycle. The dragon Saphira roared, and the soldiers before her quailed. Of course, every time I read that, I imagine that the soldiers are actually turning into quails. That's me. Okay, so I promised you a slightly longer reading, and that's what you're going to get. It's not too long. It's about 2 pages, but they're short pages. Now, one of the fun things I got to do with this book is some more illustrations. If you don't know, I've done all of the interior illustrations for the books over the years. The map, the dragon eye, and a whole bunch of other drawings like Brahm's Ring for the special editions. And if you want to see that other art, you can check it out on my website, paolini.net. Okay, I lied. There was more shameless self-promotion. In any case, for this book, I got to do a drawing for each of the 3 main sections of the book. And my favorite one is the drawing for the 3rd section, The Worm, because it's a drawing of an Urgal horn. Now, the story itself is about Urgals, but I have to give you some context, because the Urgals don't call themselves Urgals. They call themselves Urgralgra. And I know, it's a horrible word to say, Urgralgra. I was attempting to imitate the sound you make when you gargle water. And the reason I was doing that was specifically to give some difficulty to the wonderful Gerard Doyle, who reads my audiobooks. And I'm told that when he saw that word on the page, there was profanity involved. But the thing is Urgralgra has a translation. And it translates as the horned. Because Urgals have horns, and they think of themselves as those with horns, and everyone else doesn't have horns and thus lacks honor. So that's how they think about it. In any case, when you hear me mention the horned, you know what I'm talking about. So without further ado, this is going to start on page 147 in case anyone wants to follow along. Chapter 8, The Worm of Kulkaris. The day the dragon arrived was a day of death. He came from the north, a shadow upon the wind. Soft and silent, he swept across the valley, blotting out the sun with his velvet wings. Where he landed, field and forest went up in flame, drifts of ash choked the streams, beasts fled, and horned also. And the sounds of grief and terror rent the summer air. The dragon was named Vermund the Grim, and he was an old and cruel dragon, canny in the ways of the world. Word of him had come from the north, but never had there been a hint or warning that he had forsaken his lair in those frozen, far-off reaches. And yet, there he was, black as charred bone, with a polished gleam to his fitted scales, and a throat packed full of fire. The youngling, Ilgra, watched with her friends from beside the spring-fed pool where they so often swam, high in the foothills along the eastern side of the valley. From that vantage, she saw the dragon ravage their farms with fire and claw and the sweep of his jagged tail. When the warriors of Clan Skagaro attacked with bow and spear and axe, Vermund's flame consumed them, or else he trod upon them, and thus made an end to their ambitions. Even the sharpest blade could not pierce his hide, and the Skagaro had no spellcasters to aid them in battle. As such, they found themselves at the mercy of the dragon, able only to annoy or inconvenience him, but not to stop him. Never that. Like the evil worm he was, Vermund ate every person who came within his reach, male and female, elder and youngling alike. None were spared. Their livestock, too, he ate, corralled them with fences of fire, and feasted upon the helpless animals until his chops were clotted with gore and the ground a crimson shambles. All that and more Ilgra saw. She could do nothing to help, so she stayed by the pool, though to wait hurt as much as any wound. Those of her friends who weren't so wise ran to join the fray, and of their number, many were lost. As the dragon approached the hall of her family, Ilgra bared her teeth in a helpless snarl. Closer it came, and then closer still, and then with a slow-moving swipe, the scaled monster crushed her home. A howl tore from Ilgra's throat, and she sank to her knees and grasped the tips of her horns. Does she live? Does she die? Read page 150. In any case, I have been standing up here yammering for quite a while. I would love to at least attempt to answer some of your questions, and then we will move on to the signing proper. So, yes. You.
Oh, okay. I have a question. What is it possible for dragons to be conjoined twins, and if so, what will happen?
Question is, would it be possible for dragons to be co-joined twins, and if so, what would happen? Well, I think they might find it difficult to fly, unless it was just two necks and two heads on one body. And two, they would be very, very hungry. So, not impossible, but definitely something to be careful around. I'm sure they'd be very nice, but they'd be very hungry. Yes? What inspired me to make Alagasia? Do you mean the world or the story? The story. Well, I loved reading science fiction and fantasy growing up. I was homeschooled my whole life, and as a result, I graduated from high school early, mainly the result of not taking any summer breaks my whole life. Thank you, Mom. And I live in the middle of nowhere. So I graduated, and I thought, no school, this is awesome. And it was awesome for about 2 weeks. And then I got really, really bored. Now, I say that, and you think, oh, he's just bored. No, you don't understand how bored I was. I need to give you context. I was so bored, I went into our backyard, and I started to dig a hole. And this hole was about from it was about from there to here, and it was about 9-10 feet deep, through basically solid gravel. And then we had one of those old satellite dishes abandoned on our property. Now, for those of you who are younger and don't have white in your beard, I can't believe I can say that now. Satellite dishes used to be absolutely enormous, huge. And so there was one abandoned on our property, and I went over and I grabbed it and I dragged it over to the hole and I tipped it on top of the hole. And then I took hay bales, because I live in Montana, there are hay bales everywhere, and I piled hay bales on top of the satellite dish for insulation, and then I ripped dead bark off dead trees along the Yellowstone River by our house and used that to make shingles on top of the hay bales, on top of the satellite dish, on top of the hole! Now you might be wondering how I actually got into the hole with all that stuff piled on top. I did what every normal, well-adjusted teenager does, and I dug a tunnel into the hole. And then I started chopping down those dead trees I mentioned earlier, chopping them down with a claw hammer, because I didn't have an axe. And I dragged them up on our property and started planting them upright in the ground to form the framework for what was going to be a Viking-style mead hall. When I'm bored, I'm really bored. So, at that point, I realized I needed to do something else in my life aside from digging a giant hole. But the thing is, I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't in school, I didn't have a job, and the nearest town was 30 minutes away driving, and I didn't have my driver's license. So, it was a wonderful experience in one way, and I think everyone should have this experience where you have a chunk of time in your life where you don't have to do anything aside from take care of yourself. And whatever it is you choose to do in that time is probably what you should pursue as a career. Whether it's spending time with people, whether it's math, science, working with machines, playing video games, making video games, whatever it is. And in my case, that thing was stories. I loved reading fantasy. I wanted to replicate the feeling I got from a good book. And I had read a book called Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher by Bruce Scoville. Yes. By the way, he's awesome in person. It's a great book set in the real world about a young boy who goes to this antique shop, and he ends up buying a stone that turns out to be a dragon egg. And I love that idea so much of a young man finding a dragon egg that I started asking myself questions like, what sort of a world would a dragon come from? How might that egg show up in a forest somewhere? Who else would be looking for the egg? And so forth and so on. That's how you build a story. That's how you build a world. You ask questions and answer them. And that is how I started writing and got into the world of Aragon and Alagasia. Long answer to a short question. Yes? How did I come up with the names? Great question. A couple of different ways. Some of my names are word plays. So Aragon is dragon with the first letter changed from D to E. I was 15! But I do like it because it also means an era gone by, an era gone, which felt appropriate for the story. Saphira is a play on sapphire. Yazuak is an anagram for the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, little things like that. The rest of my names tend to come from either historical sources, like Old Norse or Germanic sources or Russian sources, or I invent them according to the rules of my imaginary languages. As an aside, I've always said if I could go into Alagasia and live there, I'd go live with the dwarves because I like their language so much. And I would write dwarvish opera. And I once told my agent that I was going to write an opera in Dwarvish. And he said, go right ahead, no one's going to read it. And I don't know, I'm not so sure about that. But,
I would.
yeah, and actually, I have a theory, that if you write fantasy long enough, you spontaneously grow a beard. And I actually have presented this theory to a bunch of other authors at various fantasy conventions, and they've all agreed with me, including the women. So just putting that out there. Yes?
The character Arya, was she inspired by a real life person?
Was the character of Arya inspired by anyone in real life? I wish! Alas, no. Arya was the hardest character for me to write, because the exact opposite of a 15-year-old homeschooled guy is an over 100-year-old elven princess. But I learned a lot by writing her character, and learning to see her as Aragon does, not as he wants her to be, but as she actually is. Yes?
A lot of fantasy things, like Tolkien, view their story as like a prehistory to the modern Earth, but some are just entirely separate. Do you think this is like a prehistory to now, or is it just like an entirely separate universe?
Is Alagasia prehistory to the real world, or a completely separate place? It's a completely separate place. Yeah, so it's not leading up to the modern era in the modern history, like Tolkien's work does. So, yes? Is there anything I would change? Yes, all of it. I know I could do a better job writing the series now because I'm more technically skilled. If I were to change anything, like story-wise, not a huge amount. The one thing I do wish I had done would have been to have another chapter or so from Nasuada's point of view in Eldest, when the Varden go from Trondheim to the country of Serda. There's a lot that happens there, and I don't really show it to the reader, so I would have liked to have done that. Yes?
Will there be another Aragon book?
Say that again?
Will there be another Aragon book?
Will there be another Aragon book? Do you mean with him as the main character, or...?
Either way.
Either way? Yes, there are going to be lots more books. I just have to write them. Yes. What's the rarest colored dragon? Tie-dye. You'll have to shout, please. Could I demonstrate the twist that the Elvish greeting does? I could, but I would be self-conscious, so I'm not going to. Yes?
So you've been doing this since you were 15. Can you say some like ups and downs of like publishing that like, because I'm an aspiring writer, so I'm curious.
So the question is, I've been doing this since I was 15. Can I say anything about the ups and downs of this profession? I could do a whole presentation on that. There are challenges with this profession like any other. The first one is that you have to be consistent. You have to sit down every day and work at your work, which is difficult when you don't get an immediate payoff emotionally or financially. You have to be willing to commit yourself to something for a minimum of a year for a large book. And a lot of times it's closer to 3. And with my science fiction book, it's been closer to 7 or 8 years. Can you work on one project for that long? That's challenge 1. Challenge 2 is getting it actually published. And if you do get it published, people will say mean things about it. Doesn't matter how good your book is, people will say mean things about it. That's okay. You can't write something that's going to please everyone. You have to make your peace with that and write something that's the best you can write and hopefully will please some number of readers. And then on top of that, financially, this is like any entertainment job, this is a career of ups and downs. You will have periods where you get nice big royalty checks, hopefully, and then maybe you don't publish a book for 7 or 8 years. Fortunately, people still enjoy reading my books, so, I can do this for a living, but for a lot of authors, you can't afford to have that sort of a gap. You have to put out a book every 1.5 to 2 years, minimum, in order to keep this going. So those are all the challenges. Staying physically fit is important because you sit all the time. So, exercise, diet, that sort of thing's important. Staying mentally. One of the downsides of writing is that it tends to attract people who are introspective, right? You like being by yourself. You like reading. You like writing. So you spend a lot of time writing, and that makes it worse. And it trains you to always think about what could happen. Oh, someone finds a dragon egg. What could happen? And immediately you've got 10 years worth of events in your head. That doesn't always help when it comes to dealing with real-world things. You can end up cycling all the time. At least that's been my experience, and talking with a lot of other authors, it is a downside. So all of those, the ups are wonderful. The ups are getting to meet folks like you. The ups are knowing that you wrote something people actually care about. The ups do make it worthwhile, but you have to take a balanced approach to all of it. And the other thing is, if you write something bad, it doesn't make you a bad author. Seriously, every single author writes a bad sentence, a bad paragraph, a bad character, a bad chapter, even a bad book. As long as you're willing to fix it, that's okay. If you accept right now you will make mistakes, and that's a natural part of the process, you become immune to failure. That is a superpower. There are so many talented writers who start writing, and then they get editing, and they get discouraged, and they just never finish their work because of that. So if you accept right now that I'm going to write a bad sentence, I'm going to write a bad book on occasion, and that's okay, you just became unstoppable.
Now, this is a question I've been wanting to answer for quite some time. In exact feet, what were the height, wingspan, and length of Thorn, Shuriken?
So the question is the exact size of the dragons at the end of the inheritance cycle. Tweet me that, and I will tweet you a piece of art that shows you their relative scale.
Is it on DeviantArt?
Yes, you've probably seen it.
I have it in my camera.
Okay, you already have that art. I can't give you exact sizes because...
I've gone to actual math to try to figure this out.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to futz with their sizes in the next book just to keep you on your toes. Yes? Is there any chance there will be any follow-on movies to the one that wasn't made? I hope so. I would love to see a remake of the thing that wasn't made. Whether or not, you may or may not know this, but the first movie was not made by 20th Century Fox, and Fox Studios was bought by Disney this year, which means that technically Aria is now a Disney princess. Now, whether or not Disney is going to want to do something with Aragon, I have no idea. Personally, I think it really fits them and they could do something with it. If they do move in that direction, rest assured I will be writing the screenplay and I will be a tyrant on set.
Yes. Thank you.
thing is, I was actually going to have a cameo in the movie, but I was touring at the time, so it didn't work out. But I asked for it, and they agreed. They were going to fly me out to Budapest, Hungary, where they were filming, and I was going to get dressed up as an Urgle, as the shortest Urgle ever. And I was going to appear in the final battle, and I was going to get my head chopped off by Aragon on screen. Because who doesn't want to get killed by their main character, right? Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but maybe one of these days. Yes. How did I come up with the friendship between Aragon and Saphira, especially starting so young? I think that when we're teenagers and we're going through adolescence, we all want a best friend. You know, we all want someone who really understands us and what we're going through. I mean, heck, I'm just turned 36 and I still like that, having that. And especially when you're a teenager, knowing that you have a friend who really, truly understands you, has your back, and can eat anyone you don't like. I don't know about you, but that's a good friend. Yes.
Aren't you glad that the Aragon movies are better than the first two movies?
Sorry, can you say that?
Oh.
What do I think of the Percy Jackson?
Aren't you glad the Aragon movies are better?
Oh, so the question is about, Aragon versus Percy Jackson films and everything. The only thing I'm going to say on that topic is a lot of the same team that worked on Aragon did the Percy Jackson films. So you can make of that what you will. Yes.
What is your sister's favorite trait that you wrote into her fictional counterpart?
What is my sister's favorite trait that I wrote into her character? Her tendency to be infuriatingly cryptic and obscure. Sorry?
Who selected the accents?
Who selected the accents in the audiobook? It was actually the reader, Gerard Doyle. He is Irish, but grew up in Britain and the US, so he can basically do a whole bunch of accents. He's the one that chose them originally. These days, I probably have a little more say in that, but he did a wonderful job reading the books, so, and it was nice to have him back for The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm.
Indeed, love God. So, I've always been a fan. I didn't like the movie, but I always thought that it would be great as an anime instead. Would you ever consider that?
Would I consider it an animated version? If it were done in the style of like the Last Avatar or something, sure. Last Airbender. Yes. What is a cool or emotional memory from touring? I have been chewed on by a sugar glider while touring. I've had multiple events where blood was shed. Please, let's not add another one to this list. I've got a couple of actual scars from touring. I've had people give me swords. Honestly, my favorite one has been meeting families where they've named a child after one of the characters. That just is amazing. And incredibly humbling. That and the woman who got my face tattooed on her thigh. So, what are you going to do, right? I would love to keep answering your questions, but there are a lot of books to sign, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. However, if you want to ask your question as you come up to the signing, feel free. Now, before you all get up and go away, there's something I want to do. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to take a picture here so I can show my publisher that I'm actually working. So everyone say, Aragon! Aragon! Awesome.